gentlemen, I'd like to start today by asking you a few questions. Should social media companies give access to terror groups like Hamas, Taliban and Al-Qaeda? Should tech giants be politically inclined? Where should they go whose posts are censored online? These are a few of the several questions that have emerged, and here's why. Today, Meta owner Mark Zuckerberg admitted, in fact, that the Biden-Harris administration pressured the company to censor content related to COVID-19. This, remember, comes right in the middle of the US presidential elections. In August 2021, Zuckerberg said his company had removed more than 20 million posts related to COVID-19. US had seen massive information war during COVID-19. Health experts were divided and even shunned. Death toll was allegedly manipulated and vaccine awareness was a big issue. 2 days back, Telegram owner Pavel Durov was arrested as soon as he landed at the Le Bourg airport near Paris. Durov has been arrested as part of a preliminary police investigation into what is being called allegedly allowing a wide range of crimes due to a lack of moderators on Telegram. Now, the charges include allowing organized crime, child pornography, money laundering, and narcotics. Telegram has called these allegations absurd, even as several Russian analysts suggest that this is part of Europe's larger plan to work against Russia amid the war. But politics and wars aside, let's focus on how tech giants operate, how they bend their rules in different countries, and whether a common global regulation can be ever achieved. Joining me first on the show is Arvind Gupta. He's the head Digital India Foundation. Let me go across to him. Arvind Gupta, good evening, namaskar. Welcome to Mirror Now. Mark Zuckerberg admitting that COVID-19 data was censored by the US government. Of course, this comes in the middle of the US presidential elections. It has its own political implications. But as far as tech giants and how they operate across different countries is concerned, how do you see this?
This has grave implications. India always has believed that there is some sort of non-interference, and I will come to the exceptions when it comes to platforms or technologies originating from the more democratic nations like the US. But there were always some exceptions, as I said. Things like Twitter protested when we showed them that there was organized external influence operations happening. When we were trying to enforce our democratic norms on Twitter, they took their own. This is pre-Elon Musk era, of course, era. So they resisted a lot of things that the government was giving feedback to, and under the whole garb of free speech today. And Facebook has done that. Facebook has also, always championed this. What we're seeing today is a violation of the core principle of these so-called neutral spaces. Number one, they are becoming an extension of the state, and this is seriously concerning. I'm saying this with a lot of research and authority, that this was the reason that the Chinese platforms got banned in India. That we saw them as a clear extension of the state, and they were influencing India's domestic, public order, national security implications, so many things. And a lot of people questioned the freedom index and all in India when the government took strict action against any of the platforms. Today, just for the sake of the political flip-flop, the owners of the platform clearly coming out. They were, as you already said, they were aligned to a particular political ideology before that, and they've also flipped ideology. So they're coming out and saying this, but this was always known. This was quite clear in their actions, in their behavior towards countries like India. But we have been very, very strong, and how we have protected our democracy. We have called this out, and YouTube, whether it is Meta, but YouTube has been at fault. Twitter, I have said, it has been fault. Between Meta, WhatsApp has been at fault. So nobody is really very, very clean in this. And basically every country will watch out for
themselves. It's interesting that you called US more democratic country, but who's deciding which country is more democratic? I mean, if we go by democracy standards, you have Mark
Well,
Zuckerberg himself saying that he was asked by the Biden and Harris administration to censor online. Where's the democracy?
that is absolutely the point. I totally agree with that. When I say more democratic than the Chinese, that is the comparison, because the platforms that operated in India were either mostly from the West, which is a more democratic country than China. And of course, China doesn't have democracy. So I always believe, and Chinese got banned, and we have alternates now. But the core was the Chinese, of course, were the extension of the state, whereas US was not that much. But today it's quite clear that most of the platforms, and first it was Twitter. We clearly have a lot of evidence that Twitter has a lot of backholes. In fact, the whole team, when Elon Musk took over, was fired because they had given preferential access to FBI, to NSA there locally, and to the administration. Facebook has joined that. It's the largest social media giant out there, and this is really showing true colors of many of these platforms who preach freedom of speech as one of their biggest defenses. They themselves are not really free from influence of their own administration in their own region. What are they talking about in other democracies? So when I compare democracy, it is against with respect to China, of course, not with respect to India, and I think the larger point I'm making is the content neutrality has to be maintained. You talked about whether there's a global convergence of what should be done. I think the biggest principle of trust, of fairness, of removing bias, and ensuring content neutrality, which is what the purpose of these platforms is to be there. The local contextualization has to be very,
Arvind Gupta, I'll tell you what, when we talk about content neutrality, when we talk about balance, when we talk about freedom of speech, you have a platform like Telegram, whose owner has now been arrested. And we know that Telegram is used by terror groups as well. Whether it's Hamas, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's Taliban, they've all used, and not just terror groups. You've got other, groups operating on Telegram, whether it's related to, say, piracy, film piracy, or there are charges of narcotic sale and organized crime being functional to Telegram groups. Now, when you talk about freedom of speech and content neutrality, these platforms argue that our platforms are open to everybody and anybody can use them. Where do you draw the line?
The line is drawn. Every country's context has to be taken into account. India's line is very clear. Our national security is primary, our local laws are primary, our public order is primary, and our democratic norms are primary. And if anybody is violating that, it may be the democratic norms, the freedom of speech norms in America and India are world apart. They cannot have the same standard. So we are worried about our local norms. The fact that something is allowed in France or in the US or UK, or they have a geopolitical tension and they take action, that's their prerogative. Our prerogative has, and the stance has been there for the last 7 to 8 years, that it's our local rules, local context, which is important, not anything else. And these giants are now realizing, I've always said this, they never had presence in India. They slowly started building presence in India from employees. We were their largest market. We are by far their largest market. And they actually played India as a second fiddle. But they benefited from India. They never paid attention to India. But now, all the things that India wanted from them, accountability, governance, better local governance, is coming back. And that is what we want. That as a country, that's how you safeguard yourself. And, the localization of, and they are big enough. They have enough technology. And as we go forward, I must warn, as we go forward, there's a lot of AI that is coming into play. There's a lot of other issues will come into play. We have to thank that we have a lot of public infrastructure in it. We have better policies that we can put some guardrails on them. Otherwise, they can amok. And those are the worries. I mean, the worry is one side. Of course, there is these platforms exist from a social media narrative and a lot of other things. But there is also competition and local ecosystem of startups. There is a lot of implications, and they have really so far exercised their duopolies or big tech powers and never really adhered to local norms. They have a lot of money power also. So I think what this is showcasing, that they are not, in Hindi mein jaise kehte hain doodh ke dhule, they cannot preach to us in from a very high mantle, they have to come down. They have to agree that they need to operate with India, learn from India, and so far India has actually been very fair dealing with all these platforms, giving them a parliamentary hearing, and our democracy works in a much more fairer manner. And I think the best hope for the world also comes from what policy and what directions India will give. You talked about Telegram. I don't want to make a lot of this show about your show today about Telegram, but there's a lot of things that happen on Telegram. They have a lot of affiliated businesses like their crypto mining, cryptocurrency businesses. This is a very dark web that operates. And I leave that comment on Telegram there, but they gained popularity. There was a time
which is what I'm saying,
WhatsApp
Arvind Gupta. These platforms
privacy
allow all of these under the concept of free speech, under the concept of being open platforms. But where does free speech start and where does it end?
Absolutely, 100%. India has pulled up Telegram many times in the past, and terrorist groups and anti-national, non-state or rogue or non-rogue actors from other states operating and using Telegram as a dark tunnels where we don't have access. I think we have serious issues. So they cannot operate under the garb of freedom of speech and do activities which are contrary to India's interests. Absolutely with that one. There is no doubt about it.
Okay. Talking about Mark Zuckerberg, Arvind Gupta, he has, of course, said... Okay.
Let me leave you and your...
Okay, if you have to go, Arvind...
No, I don't have to go. I'm just going to give you one very important thing. That what we also have to see...
go ahead.
That India doesn't become... these platforms don't become, as I said, an extension of the state and functions into India. And so protecting our democracy, whichever administration we have, election integrity is very important. And I think what the media also need to realize, what the activists need to realize, that what Facebook CEO himself has said, that they have operated under biases because of their political ideology. Today, why did Zuckerberg have to wait 3 years since the vaccine started to make this declaration? Because
which is what I was coming to, Arvind Gupta. The fact that the timing here is important. The timing where he's saying now that he comes up with this admission, it is important because it comes right in the middle of the US presidential election. But then it boils down to the fact, should tech giants be even politically inclined? Were they ever neutral spaces to start with?
And that is the point I'm making. We have always found this. When we say this, when we had an issue with, as I said, Twitter, YouTube in the past, Facebook, all of this we've said that we saw a lot of political maneuvering of content. But a lot of people, there were parliamentary hearings, the media called out that the BJP-led government is calling them for certain vested interests. It was not that. And I'm saying the point has been proven that we have now evidence that there was political ideologies dictating the kind of content, the kind of content moderation they were doing in India, the kind of throttling they were doing in India, the kind of user base increase or reach increase of certain videos they were doing. We are kind of indicated. We are kind of clearly, there is evidence now coming from the top. So no Facebook person can tell us, no, we don't have any political bias. We are ideology neutral. They are not. And that is what this is. And that applies to a lot of big tech. Facebook has admitted it. There are others who are not admitting it, but they have that bias.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Arvind Gupta, thank you very much for joining us on Mirror Now tonight and sharing your perspective and, of course, helping us understand the India perspective as well. Thank you very much. With that, viewers, let's also welcome Khushbu Jain, Supreme Court lawyer, and Jain, cybersecurity expert on the broadcast. Let's try and understand from them what this entire situation means in terms of our cyber space. Jain, let me come to you first. Is there a concept of absolute freedom online?
Absolutely no, but theoretically it is possible, and that is where the confrontations between the states and the private companies, especially these big tech companies, are happening. Initially, to begin with, all these private companies are formed the pretext and the hope that they will offer a politically neutral, safer, encrypted spaces to the users, which other companies are not. And in many years, when they start growing, the user base increases, they also fall into the pressure of political biases, political compulsions, government pressures, regulatory compromises.
Yeah.
And this is what has happened with Telegram also. So if you see carefully, Durov is the same guy who walked away from Russia after selling his stake in, we contacted Russian social media network because he refused to bow down to the Russian government's pressure to hand over the detail of Ukrainian users during the 2010 uprising in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now he's
And
the same
therefore became
guy
the
who
hero
found
of
Telegram
free speech.
in a very cluttered space, despite seeing no business opportunity. Still, he formed that company with the hope that he will not compromise on security and political neutrality, and he'd offer a safe space. But offering safe space does not to users should not mean offering safe sanctuaries to the terrorists and pedophiles. Now, that is, I think, he made a huge mistake by allowing terrorists, drug operator, narco gangs to operate freely on Telegram, walk away with some calls, sending ransomwares, viruses. Telegram became a hub of anything and everything under the internet. It was basically an open version of dark web available to anyone and everyone under the sun. Now he moved. He's got today 3 citizenships of different countries: UAE, Russia, France, and a couple of Caribbean countries. Now, see, the problem is, if you look at Facebook or if you look at Twitter, all these platforms, as Arvind was rightly pointing out, they have been the extension of US deep state. They have been all indulging in, censoring information, resigning operations. And see, Mark Zuckerberg today, with the addition of the fact that he was under pressure to censor information related to COVID-19 vaccine, is not a starting claim. The bigger problem is the malice with that network is that they admitted today that they falsely and incorrected, in a very deliberate manner, censor information related to Hunter Biden. Now, that was the biggest political scandal that would have destroyed the Biden family in 2020 election, and which would have given Donald Trump an edge. So they did political censorship without verifying facts, without court orders, without executive orders, just on the instruction of deep state agencies, with a complete political bias, without any responsibility. And it took them years to come up with that fact. And not only that, this is the same platform where 3 viceroys sitting in a drawing room decided that they had the power to censor a sitting US president, a person whom they said that is entrusted with the US public's trust in nuclear launch codes. But according to them, he was incapable of operating a Twitter account and he was blocked. So imagine 3, these cronies sitting in a drawing room had the power to censor a US president. That reflects that these countries today are assuming the roles of sovereign, the functions of sovereign. And this is the biggest challenge. I think what France has done today, if this was done in a
which is where Jiten Jain,
like India or somewhere,
I want to understand from Khushbu Jain. Khushbu, help us understand, the entire situation is such a gray area. The online space is a vast space. You don't know where to draw the line. You don't know the traceability of a post, of a source. It's very hard, that entire traceability process. Where do you draw the line? Where does the law stand on this? How hopeful should we be that a legal system of any country would actually give justice for any kind of wrongdoing that has been done by tech giants?
Shreya, that's where you have to look into the 2021 rules, the intermediary guidelines that came in 2021 by the government of India, which specifically put across that as per the 2021 guidelines, if there are crimes which are punishable above 5 years, there has to be an immediate takedown. There has to be sharing who's the perpetrator behind those content over there, so that when it comes to enforceability of our law, when it comes to investigation, that doesn't become an impediment. I mean, I absolutely agree when it comes, it's a delicate balance when it comes to freedom of speech and expression and right to privacy. At the same time, when it comes to enforcement of law, because it cannot be an absolute. Your right to privacy, your right to freedom of speech and expression cannot be a threat to my rights, which are being enshrined. So there cannot be a conflict, that you cannot misuse your right to privacy. You cannot misuse your right to freedom of speech and expression. That's where I think that delicate balance come in play, that you will have to understand when it comes to enforceability of law, when it comes to crimes which have been happening, which have been codified in the law in my country. I'm talking about just my country. That's where we have to bring in that aspect that, okay, you enjoy the safe harbor protection, which was given to you. You are a platform. You're just an intermediary in between. But when it comes to all, have seen that how these platforms have become a breeding ground for criminals only because of the aspect of privacy and freedom of speech that has been guaranteed by these platforms. You look at trafficking, organized crime, you look at child sexual abuse material available on these platforms. You look at the kind of crimes from hate speech to, going to an extent of drug trafficking to human trafficking. All kind of things have been happening on these platforms. So when it comes to these kind of activities is where we say, India says, or any other country says, that please share us the details of the person, help us in investigating it, help us in catching hold of that criminal and enforcing our laws that are already in place. That's where you help us. Now, if they become an impediment over there is where we say, what we do it in offline mode,
Khushbu
that
Jain,
if you can
that's
be,
where governments also face the big challenge of actually getting these giants to follow the guidelines. Technically, they should be, ideally, they should be following all the guidelines that a country has placed for companies. But they've become so big and, so dominant, so, monopolizing this industry that it's very difficult for governments to actually get them to follow the guidelines.
that's where we say we are going to take your safe harbor protection away. So the way, if you are accomplice to any crime offline and your impediment is where you will be tried under the FIR, your name would be incorporated. The same thing is done here by the France, and same thing can be done by India as well after the 2021 guidelines, that we say that if you're accomplice and if you're impediment to that means obstruction of justice, you'll also be tried. So that's where we'll take away your safe harbor protection. So if you're not complying, take away your safe harbor protection. You'll be tried in the court of the law the way other people are being tried. No extra protection or layer would be granted to you just because you're an intermediary, because you will be accomplice to the crime that has been committed by some third party. And despite having a knowledge, if you're aiding and helping out in getting that criminal go scot-free, is where you're abetting. So it's literally that's where we draw that line that okay there. But then again, I would say over here, Shreya, that see, you cannot give an absolute power to anybody. We see how even government has been misusing when it comes to power. That's where we say that a delicate balance that has to be looked into, because trust, you and me also having a platform where we can freely express our views and we can have it. That's where we say there has to be accountability and transparency from both the sides, not just tech giants but the government. There has to be a process that has to be followed by the government, and that's where we bring a place which is safe for all of us and we feel secure, and at the same time we have our rights, which is freedom of speech and expression and privacy, being also being looked upon.
That's right. I think countries across the world need to come together to actually regulate online content and online space and find that balance in this vast universe that is called the online cyber world. But I'll have to leave it there. Khushbu Jain and Jiten Jain, thank you very much to both of you for joining us on Mirror Now and sharing your perspective. Thank you very much. Namaskar.